Big news. The silence that separated two hearts for so long has finally been broken. A family member could no longer carry the weight of the secret they had hidden for years. What they admitted has left an entire family in tears. And it changes everything you believed about your soulmate. Before this truth disappears forever. Listen carefully, because this message may explain everything. Listen carefully. There comes a moment when even the strongest lies become too heavy to carry. For years, everyone believed that the distance between you and your soulmate happened naturally. That life simply pulled the two of you in different directions. That fate had decided your paths would never cross again. But that was never the complete story. Deep inside one home, behind closed doors where no outsider could hear, someone had been protecting a truth they were terrified would one day come into the light. Every family gathering, every wedding conversation, every discussion about the future carried an invisible burden. One person always knew exactly why you and your soulmate never found your way back to each other, yet every time the opportunity came to speak, fear won over honesty. They convinced themselves they were protecting the family, protecting peace, protecting traditions. But every silent decision slowly destroyed two hearts that had never truly stopped caring about each other. Days turned into months. Months became years. And the silence only became heavier. Your soulmate often wondered why every path somehow led away from you. They replayed old conversations in their mind, searching for mistakes they thought they had made. Sometimes they blamed themselves. Sometimes they blamed destiny. Sometimes they convinced themselves you had simply forgotten them. But none of those thoughts were true. Behind every unanswered question stood one family member carrying a secret that grew darker with every passing season. They watched birthdays come and go. They watched celebrations happen without genuine happiness. They watched forced smiles replace real laughter. And every time they looked into your soulmate's eyes, guilt quietly whispered that one day the truth would demand to be heard. Don't skip. Because what happened next became the turning point no one expected. One quiet evening, surrounded by memories they could no longer escape, that family member finally realized the secret had stolen enough years. Their hands trembled as they reached for an old box filled with forgotten letters, photographs, and memories that had been hidden from everyone. Inside that box rested the proof of every choice that had kept two lives apart. Tears filled their eyes as they whispered words they had never dared to say aloud. I can't hide this anymore. At that very moment, they understood that silence was no longer protecting anyone. It was only continuing the pain they had created. They knew that once the truth was spoken, relationships would change forever. Some people would be angry. Others would feel betrayed. Old wounds would reopen. Yet for the first time in years, fear no longer felt stronger than honesty. They decided it was finally time for everyone to know why you and your soulmate had been separated. Why every reunion mysteriously failed. Why every opportunity disappeared just when hope began to return. and why someone had quietly influenced every important decision behind the scenes without either of you ever realizing it. The confession was about to begin. And once those first words left their lips, nothing in your soulmate's family would ever be the same again. The room remained completely silent after those first trembling words escaped the family member's lips. No one interrupted them. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. It was as though every clock in the house had stopped ticking, waiting for the truth that had been buried for so many years. The family members slowly lifted their eyes, already filled with tears, and admitted that the distance between you and your soulmate had never been an accident. Every misunderstanding, every cancelled meeting, every unanswered message, every sudden change of plans had been influenced by choices made inside the family long before either of you understood what was happening. They confessed that they had convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. They believed they were protecting the family's future, reputation, and expectations. But as the years passed, they watched your soulmate slowly lose the light that once filled their heart. No achievement, no celebration, and no new relationship ever brought genuine happiness. Behind every smile was the same unanswered question. Why did everything fall apart so suddenly? The family member admitted that hearing that question over and over again had become impossible to bear because they already knew the answer. Your soulmate stood completely still, unable to process what they were hearing. Memories began returning one after another. The day a phone call was mysteriously interrupted. The visit that was unexpectedly cancelled at the last moment. The message that never received a reply. The strange feeling that someone always seemed to know what was happening before either of you did. For years these moments felt like bad luck. Now they suddenly fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered. The family member revealed that whenever hope began to grow between you and your soulmate, they quietly stepped in. Sometimes it was only a few carefully chosen words. Sometimes it was a false warning. Sometimes it was convincing another relative to interfere before anyone noticed. They never imagined the consequences would become so permanent. They thought time would heal everything. Instead, every passing year only made the silence more painful. They admitted there were countless nights when they sat awake, wondering whether they should tell the truth, but fear always convinced them to wait one more day. One more week. One more year. Don't skip. Because the next confession shocked everyone in the room even more. The family member then reached into the old box and carefully unfolded a faded piece of paper that no one else had ever seen. It wasn't simply a letter. It was a record of every decision they had made to keep you and your soulmate apart. Written beside each date was a short explanation. Stopped the meeting, changed the plan, told them not to trust, convinced the family to wait. Every sentence felt heavier than the one before it. As the paper passed from one trembling hand to another, tears quietly rolled down the faces of relatives who had believed an entirely different story for years. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others lowered their heads, unable to look at your soulmate. No one could deny the truth anymore because every page carried the weight of choices that had changed two lives forever. Your soulmate finally spoke, but their voice barely rose above a whisper. They didn't ask why they had been lied to. They didn't ask who else had known. Instead, they asked one heartbreaking question. Did they ever stop caring about me? The room fell silent once again. The family member closed their eyes, unable to hold back their tears any longer. They answered with complete honesty that not for a single day had your name disappeared from your soulmate's heart. Every attempt to move on had failed because every road somehow led back to the memories of you. Even when your soulmate tried convincing themselves that life had chosen a different path, something inside refused to let go. That was the greatest punishment the family member had carried. Knowing they had separated two people whose feelings had never truly disappeared. As those words echoed through the house, another relative quietly stood up from the corner of the room. They had remained silent throughout the entire confession, but now they held something in their hands that no one expected to see. The moment they placed it on the table, every face turned toward it in complete disbelief. Because it contained one final secret that proved the family's confession was only the beginning, and what it revealed about you was far more shocking than anyone had imagined. The object rested silently on the table, yet its presence seemed louder than anyone's voice. No one reached for it at first. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on it, as if touching it would awaken memories that had been locked away for far too long. The relative who had placed it there slowly pulled out a chair and sat down without saying a word. Their face carried the exhaustion of someone who had lived with regret for years. Finally, after a long silence, they whispered, "I kept this because I always believed the day would come when the truth would matter more than our fear." Those words sent a chill through the entire room. Your soulmate looked from one family member to another, realizing that the secret had never belonged to just one person. Some had created the silence. Others had simply allowed it to continue. That realization hurt even more than the confession itself. The relative carefully opened the worn envelope. Inside were several old photographs, handwritten notes, and one folded page that looked as though it had been read countless times before being hidden away. They handed the page directly to your soulmate without saying another word. As your soulmate unfolded it, their hands began to shake uncontrollably. The handwriting was familiar. It wasn't written by the family member who had confessed. It wasn't written by another relative. It contained words about you. Words that had never reached the person they were meant for. Every sentence revealed feelings that should have changed everything years ago. There were moments of hope, moments of confusion, and moments of quiet determination that proved the story your soulmate had believed was never the real story at all. The room became completely silent as tears slowly filled your soulmate's eyes. For the first time in years, they realized that while they believed they had been forgotten, the truth had been the exact opposite. Every memory suddenly took on a different meaning. The unexpected silence. The sudden distance. The unanswered questions. None of them had been signs that love had disappeared. They had been the result of decisions made by people who believed they were protecting something important. But instead of protecting the family, they had created years of regret that no one could erase. One older relative quietly admitted that there had been several opportunities to reveal the truth earlier, but every time someone prepared to speak, another voice insisted, "Leave the past where it belongs." That advice had sounded wise at the time, yet it slowly became the very reason everyone was trapped inside the same painful story. Now, looking at your soulmate's tears, every excuse felt meaningless. Don't skip. Because what happened next changed the atmosphere inside the house forever. Your soulmate gently placed the letter back on the table and looked directly at every family member sitting in the room. There was no anger in their eyes. There was no shouting. There was only disappointment mixed with an overwhelming sadness. They quietly asked, "If all of you knew pieces of the truth, why did no one think I deserved to know?" No one answered immediately. The silence itself became the answer. One by one, family members lowered their heads. Some wiped away tears. Others struggled to look your soulmate in the eyes. The weight of their choices had finally become impossible to ignore. Years earlier they believed they were preventing heartbreak. Instead, they had allowed heartbreak to continue every single day without realizing how deeply it was affecting everyone involved. Then the family member who had started the confession stood up once again. They walked to an old cabinet, unlocked a hidden drawer, and removed a small diary wrapped carefully in faded cloth. They admitted there was still one part of the story they had never shared with anyone. It wasn't about family expectations. It wasn't about tradition. It was about a single conversation that had taken place years ago, a conversation capable of changing everything if it had been spoken aloud at the right time. "I wrote down every word because I knew I would never forget it," they whispered. "I thought I was protecting everyone. But I was really protecting my own fear." As they slowly opened the diary, a pressed flower slipped from between its pages and landed softly on the floor. Your soulmate stared at it in complete disbelief. They recognized it immediately. It was connected to a memory only two people should have known. That tiny forgotten keepsake proved that someone had been watching the story from the shadows far longer than anyone had imagined. The family member took a deep breath, turned to the marked page, and quietly said, "Before I read this, you need to understand that after tonight, nothing about your past will ever look the same again." The family member's voice trembled as they began reading from the old diary. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. It described a conversation that had taken place years earlier, on a quiet evening when the future of the entire family seemed uncertain. During that conversation, someone had expressed fear that if you and your soulmate remained together, old family conflicts would resurface and painful secrets would become impossible to hide. Instead of trusting love to overcome those fears, they chose control. They believed that separating two hearts would solve every problem. At the time, it sounded like the safest decision. Looking back now, it had become the greatest mistake of their lives. As each page was read aloud, every person in the room realized they had spent years protecting a decision that had never deserved to be protected. Your soulmate listened without interrupting. Tears quietly rolled down their face, but for the first time, those tears were not caused by confusion. They finally understood that they had never been abandoned. They had never been forgotten. They had never been unworthy of love. The silence that had haunted them for years was built upon fear, assumptions, and choices made by others. The weight they had carried inside their hearts suddenly began to lift. Every unanswered question finally had an answer. Every painful memory finally made sense. Even though nothing could return the lost years, the truth itself became a beginning instead of an ending. Don't skip. Because the final moments revealed something no one expected. The family member slowly closed the diary and walked toward your soulmate. With trembling hands, they offered a sincere apology, not only for the lies, but for every opportunity that had been stolen, every hope that had been delayed, and every memory that could have been different. One by one, the rest of the family followed. Some couldn't find the words to speak. Others simply embraced one another as tears filled the room. It wasn't a perfect ending, because some wounds take time to heal. But it was the first honest moment the family had shared in years. Then another relative quietly stepped forward with a small wooden box that had remained unopened throughout the entire confession. Inside was a collection of keepsakes connected to your story, old photographs, forgotten notes, and memories that had been carefully preserved all this time. Among them was a single handwritten message that no one had ever delivered. It simply read, "If the truth is ever told, don't let another day be wasted." Those words echoed through the room long after they were spoken. Your soulmate folded the note carefully and held it close, not as a reminder of the years that had been lost, but as a promise that fear would never again decide the future. The family finally understood that honesty may arrive late, but it still has the power to heal what silence could never repair. And somewhere beyond that room, a new chapter quietly began, not because the past had disappeared, but because the truth had finally been allowed to breathe. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't finding love for the first time. It's discovering that real love survived every lie, every misunderstanding, and every year of separation, patiently waiting for the moment when the truth would finally set it free.